The fool is one of the most relatable, intriguing, and recurring figures in the world. There have been fools who have caused surprise and laughter since time immemorial. We worship folly by seeing it in other people, in the world, and by willingly displaying it in ourselves. It is one of the timeless archetypes we all inherit at birth. Many of us, in fact, suffer from the absence of the fool in our lives. Frenetic and upright, we take ourselves far too seriously, trying so hard to conform to a world that promotes workaholism, efficiency, and productivity that we might as well be cogs in a machine. As William Shakespeare said, "All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players." Forgetting that playfulness is a basic human need, we wonder why we so easily become bored and exhausted, losing our capacity for spontaneity, authenticity, and passion. The antidote to this would be to give the fool archetype some space in our lives. But to stay in balance, and not become excessively foolish and irresponsible, we also need to develop the archetype of the sage. Someone who, despite being wise, recognizes the limits of his knowledge and can laugh at himself every now and then. Archetypes are not part of a mechanical system. They are pieces of life itself, images that are integrally connected to the living individual by the bridge of emotion. The character of the fool is complex, and various characteristics have been attributed to him. That he is dull-witted, inarticulate, unable to conform to conventional standards of behavior, and at the same time that he has a natural simplicity and innocence of heart. The derivation of the word fool is the Latin follis, meaning a pair of bellows expelling empty air. Extended to people, it implies an empty-headed person with insubstantial thoughts. At the same time, bellows furnish the oxygen needed for combustion, in much the same way that the fool fires us up. In 1511, the Dutch scholar Erasmus published In Praise of Folly, which became hugely popular and is a profoundly penetrating examination of the fool in Western literature. Folly introduces herself, and since nobody ever praises her, she begins by praising herself, arguing that life would be dull without her. Folly criticizes everyone. Erasmus' close friends warned him of the possible dangers of attacking the church. However, even religious figures found the work amusing. Friendship and marriage, Erasmus suggests, contain a certain amount of folly, because we tend to overlook the defects of our friends and loved ones, and consider them small vices compared to those of other people. Intellectuals are foolish in their pursuit of knowledge, spending years going to libraries, doing research, thinking that what they are doing is tremendously important, so that a few other intellectuals over half a century will read their book and think very highly of it. Folly compares philosophers to theater critics who unmask the characters on stage and ruin the actor's performance. They are boring and annoying. Philosophers don't seem to understand how the illusions that help make life bearable can be useful even if they distort reality. The fool seems infinitely freer and happier than those who are burdened by wisdom. They are the life of the party. Fools always speak the truth because they lack the wisdom to carefully craft lies or to strategically manipulate others. In essence, there is nothing that can make life happier than the joy that accompanies laughter and play. Folly is not merely universal but necessary, and even desirable, to humanity. To be a person is nothing other than to play the fool, and to acknowledge this very fact is the highest form of wisdom. The fool represents a nostalgic return to a simpler way of life, a wisdom that comes not from the mind but from the heart. Sometimes the down-to-earth and simple-minded, in their purity of heart, can penetrate to profounder truths than those encumbered with learning and convention. In the same way we sometimes sense a more resonant truth in popular proverbs than in rational exposition. Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky writes, "The wisest of all, in my opinion, is he who can, if only once a month, call himself a fool, a faculty unheard of nowadays." In literature, wise characters sometimes depict insanity, and madmen sometimes express wisdom. The oxymoron wise fool is a literal paradox in which the character identified as a fool comes to be regarded as the beholder of wisdom. People sometimes accuse wise people of insanity in order to conceal their unwanted wisdom, either fearing the harsh words on many controversial topics or simply punishing them for speaking boldly. The archetypal wise fool is Socrates. Not only was his educational method based on exposing the folly of the supposedly wise, but he himself claimed that his own wisdom was derived from an awareness of his ignorance. Knowledge of ignorance is itself a kind of knowledge. As Shakespeare writes, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, the other is to refuse to believe what is true. When there's an uncomfortable truth that needs to be spoken, and those in power are afraid to speak about it, it is usually the fool who steps in. There is something heroic about this. It is the fool who speaks a truth nobody else dares to utter, and this brings instant relief because people know it has to be said. Generally speaking, we can distinguish between two types of fools. The natural fool, who lacks social awareness and occasionally utters the truth without understanding social conventions. And the professional fool, whose job is to make harsh truths more palatable by disguising them with humor and wit. One follows his heart, the other follows his mind. The greatest fools are often cleverer than the people who laugh at them. The fool is fearless in speaking the truth. In fact, the great secret of the successful fool is that he is no fool at all. As the English visionary artist William Blake writes, "If the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise." The fool, the clown, and the trickster share similar traits. They are sources of humor, inevitably eliciting laughter and serving as catalysts for comic catharsis. However, they also express a duality, folly and non-folly, order and disorder. What may seem like a joke can in fact be a warning. Danish theologian and philosopher Søren Kierkegaard writes, "A fire broke out backstage in a theater. The clown came out to warn the public. They thought it was a joke and applauded. He repeated it. The acclaim was even greater. I think that's just how the world will come to an end, to general applause from wits who believe it's a joke." Professional fools can bring a sense of awareness to what is going on in the world and where we are headed. Many of them, however, come from a place of tragedy. The contradictory association between comedy and mental disorders, such as depression and anxiety, is known as the sad clown paradox, where comedy acts as a defense mechanism to remove suppressed feelings of rage and aggression. People may respond with laughter to the clown, yet harbor feelings of pity, fear, or repulsion, evoking ambivalent reactions. Some people, in fact, suffer from coulrophobia, an overwhelming fear of clowns. In this day and age, clowns are a constant source of horror in books and movies. Perhaps this is because the modern clown's role is always the same, to entertain others by being the subject of laughter, and he is not always successful at it. The clown has to sacrifice his well-being by always having to put on the same face and play the same character. This one-sidedness can take its toll mentally, and the clown slowly becomes enveloped by his shadow, the dark side of his personality. The evil clown archetype is best portrayed in the Joker, one of the most recognizable villain characters in popular culture. In medieval theater, clowns would not only make spectators laugh, but sometimes also snatch them off with them into a hell mouth. The entrance of hell envisaged as the gaping mouth of a monster which terrified audiences. Thus, their light and dark sides were balanced. The fool and the trickster have a few psychological differences as well. Generally speaking, the fool is presented as an innocent or naive figure who wouldn't hurt a fly, while the trickster is intentionally deceptive and seeks to trick others and laugh at them. The trickster loves engaging in what the Germans call Schadenfreude, literally harm-joy, in which one obtains pleasure from learning or witnessing the misfortunes, failures, or humiliation of another person. A trickster may console others when they fail while secretly feeling joy. When there is an opportunity to play a trick on another person, the trickster immediately seizes it. The fool, however, is not interested in laughing at a person, but in laughing with the person, or laughing at himself. To laugh at oneself helps to break the ice, because it not only loosens one's own persona, but also helps the audience drop its social mask, allowing more genuine behavior. This courageous feat throws one into a vulnerable state, which allows others to open up and receive a message more profoundly. While the fool likes to entertain others and is usually the butt of the joke, the trickster seeks primarily to entertain himself, even if it is at the expense of others. The fool is able to maintain a sense of humor even in difficult situations, and this radiates hope to others. In a tense atmosphere, the person who is hurt may take the risk of making a joke, even if it means making a fool of himself. not just to set himself at ease, but also to bring relief to others. When a person acts like a fool through some kind of outward action, it is immediately apparent to the audience. With the trickster, it is more ambiguous. He plays the fool in order to make people fall into his trap. The trickster tricks others who never expect to be tricked. In medieval times, the court jester's job was to entertain the aristocracy in a wide variety of ways: music, storytelling, satire, comedy, juggling, and acrobatics. It was believed that keeping a fool in the premises warded off the evil eye. This is no mere antiquated superstition. It represents a psychological truth of enduring value. It is usually a good idea to place the fool out front where we can keep an eye on him. We must make room for the renegade factor in ourselves and admit him to our inner court, where he can bring us fresh ideas and new energy. Without the fool's blunt observations and playfulness, our inner landscape might become a sterile wasteland. During the Middle Ages, the Feast of Fools would be celebrated by the lower clergy on New Year's Day. To ensure society against unexpected uprisings of latent destructive urges, all conventions were temporarily suspended. The natural order of things was turned upside down, sacred rituals were parroted in obscene fashion, church authorities were ridiculed, and all underdogs were allowed to give vent to year-long repressions of hostility, lust, and rebellion. These blasphemous celebrations were eventually driven underground by the church. The fool also had an important role in the royal court and was given permission by the king to speak the truth. Both an insider and an outsider, the fool occupied a peculiar place at court as the one person able to ridicule the very person he served, in humor only, of course. Anyone who dares to challenge others or the status quo is considered a fool by those who are too afraid to speak out and would never risk their reputation by being authentic. To make his special privileges known, the fool imitated the king's crown and scepter with a cap and bells and a bauble or fool's scepter. In the manner of a ventriloquist's doll, the miniature head of the bauble could say things that the jester might not want to say himself. Because of their close relation to the king, jesters were free from punishment and allowed to speak without fear. Nevertheless, some of them went too far, and were beheaded. Fools represent values that are rejected by the group because they oppose social norms and rules. They are seen as incompetent, frequently ostracized for their rebelliousness, and thus become social misfits. However, every group must have such a figure because they are agents of change, and the liveliness of culture requires that there be space for figures whose function is to uncover and disrupt the very things that cultures are based on. Court jesters usually had some sort of physical deformity. They came from poor families and were financial burdens, but because of their unusual bodies, they were used as natural fools to create amusement. Deformities were looked upon as a special mark of the Lord, so dwarfs, hunchbacks, and the like were often chosen to be fools in royal houses. Dwarfs were particularly valued and resided in many royal courts, frequently delivered as gifts to fellow royal members. They stood next to the king, who would then appear much larger, enhancing his powerful position. These maimed ones often proved to be human beings of unusual depth and wisdom. Excluded by their physical handicaps from the activities and interests of the average person, through their loneliness and suffering they were forced to discover resources within themselves. In Shakespeare's tragedy King Lear, the king's relationship with the fool is one of friendship and dependency. When the king is left with his knights, he is a terribly lonely figure and keeps asking where the fool is. The king wants the fool to accompany him everywhere, acting as his alter ego. The fool can be expected to reverse relationships between those dominant and those subservient, as he is placed in the paradoxical position of virtual outlawry combined with utter dependence on the support of the social group to which he belongs. Shakespearean fools, like the fools and jesters of the time, use their wits to outdo people of higher social standing, but their characteristics are exaggerated for theatrical effect. The myth of Parsifal, an old Arthurian legend, describes the journey a boy must undertake to become a man. He is known as Parsifal, the young fool, and lives alone with his mother. After seeing knights pass by him, he is awestruck and decides to leave his mother in order to become a knight himself. He goes through many trials that initiate him into manhood. In the story, the Grail Castle is in serious trouble. The Fisher King, the king of the castle, has been wounded. His wounds are so severe that he cannot live, yet he is incapable of dying. He is rendered infertile and his kingdom is barren. This expresses how psychological wounds manifest themselves as problems in the external world. Every adolescent receives his Fisher King wound. It is the graduation from naive consciousness into self-consciousness. It is painful to watch an adolescent grow up and realize that the world is not just joy and happiness. However, this first contact with a wound is what later becomes the source of redemption in life. Every night there is a solemn ceremony in the Grail Castle. One of the maidens holds the Holy Grail filled with wine, and each person who drinks from it is granted their deepest wish. The Fisher King, however, does not participate and suffers alone. No further outward effort is possible if our inner capacity is wounded. It is perhaps the deepest form of suffering, to be right in front of beauty, happiness, and holiness, yet unable to partake in any of it. Prince Mishkin, on the other hand, does not understand why someone would choose to be unhappy. Instead of philosophizing endlessly, the prince spends considerable time with sinners, serving as their moral and spiritual guide. It is the small acts of kindness that truly matter in the world. Redemption is a key theme in the novel, to save the soul from a state of sinfulness through humility and compassion. In the most popular line of the book, Dostoevsky writes, "The prince assures us that beauty will save the world." In many fairy tales we see three brothers, the youngest being a simpleton whom everybody laughs at. But it is always this fool who becomes the hero of the story. He is the foolhardy brother who rushes in where angels fear to tread, and by doing so wins the hand of the princess and her kingdom. The fool seems to possess magical powers and has Lady Luck on his side. His spontaneous approach to life combines wisdom, madness, and folly. When he mixes these ingredients in the right proportions, the results are miraculous. But when there is one-sidedness, everything can end up in a sticky mess. One of the most beloved figures in Russian folklore is Ivan the Fool. The Russian writer Leo Tolstoy wrote a story titled Ivan the Fool, alluding to this figure. In the story, Ivan is the youngest and third son in a peasant family. He is taken advantage of because of his naivety, kindness, and capacity to easily forgive others, even at his own expense. His brothers are tempted by money and military power. Ivan, however, lives a simple life. He lives on a farm, taking care of his old father and mute sister, and works in the fields. When the two brothers run out of money, they insist on getting their share of their father's wealth. The father objects because it is Ivan and his sister who have helped him. Ivan, however, agrees to his brother's demands. The old devil, seeing Ivan's generosity and the lack of conflict between the brothers, sends a little devil to each one to start a feud. The two devils succeed in tempting the brothers with greed and power, and they get into trouble. Ivan, who is stricken with illness by the devil, only works harder and overcomes all obstacles. The three little devils get together in order to defeat Ivan, but they all fail. As Ivan discovers each devil one by one, they beg for their lives and tell him they will grant him any wish if he spares them. Ivan is granted a wish and innocently utters, "God bless you," which makes them vanish. He can make gold out of leaves and soldiers out of straw, and decides to give the gold coins to the village peasants and conjure up soldiers to sing and dance. Finally, the old devil loses his patience and goes to Ivan, but is also defeated. While Ivan relies on his heart and believes in legends and mythical truths, the brothers rely on their minds and practicality. Ivan ends up marrying the Tsar's daughter. The man who has nothing receives everything. The fool becomes the hero. In tarot, the fool is commonly depicted as a man holding a white rose symbolizing innocence and purity, and a small bundle of possessions in the other hand. He is willing to sacrifice everything for the trip. He walks merrily, looking up at the sky, living in a fool's paradise, absorbed in all the great adventures that await him. At his heels, a dog tries to draw his attention because he is about to fall off a cliff. Tarot derives from the 15th century Italian illustrated playing cards known as trionfi, inspired by theatrical festivals and used for entertainment. They were later called tarocchi, from which tarot is derived, and whose root tarot translates to foolishness. Therefore, tarot is also called the fool's journey. In the 18th century, the occult practice of cartomancy rose to prominence, and mystics referred to the 78 cards as arcana. The first 22 are the major arcana, and the remaining 56, the minor arcana. The Fool has the number 0 and, in most decks, is the first of the 22 major arcana cards, the last of which is the World. In the last card there is a large laurel wreath symbolizing wholeness, within which the Fool, who is androgynous, becomes the cosmic dancer and the anima mundi, world soul. However, just as the journey towards wholeness ends, it begins anew, for it is a lifelong process. The Fool is both the beginning and the end of the journey. He is heroic because he jumps from the place of comfort into the place of the unknown. The Fool's journey is similar to the monomyth of the hero's journey, in which the hero has a call to adventure and must leave the safety and comfort of the ordinary world and enter the unknown and difficult territory of the special world. Here he must defeat his dragon, the worst fear, event, person, or long-avoided memory, and gather the gold, the treasure hard to attain. The journey is a psychological and spiritual death and rebirth, in which an old aspect of oneself dies, giving birth to a new and more capable self. Finally, the hero must return to his people in the ordinary world and share the gift acquired in the special world with others. Something with the power to heal, whether it is wisdom, love, or simply the experience of having survived the special world. The Fool is a wanderer, energetic, ubiquitous, and in many myths effectively immortal. He is the most powerful of all the tarot trumps. The Fool is always in a process of becoming, and is considered the initiation into the great mystery of life. The major arcana can be viewed as pictures representing the typical experiences encountered along the age-old path to self-realization, or what Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called individuation. Tarot cards can be used for amplification, a Jungian method which allows one to clarify obscure dreams, visions, drawings, or other fantasy material by turning up the volume of the images through the comparative study of mythology, religion, alchemy, fairy tales, and art. It is appropriate that the Fool has the number 0. The power of 0 is inherent in its circular form, symbolized by infinity. The ancient Egyptian symbol of the Ouroboros, or tail devourer, represents the concept of endless return and eternity, associated with the maxim, one is all, and all is one. It is the pleroma, the fullness of being, where past, present, and future exist simultaneously. As many sages have pointed out, God is an infinite sphere, the center of which is everywhere, the circumference nowhere. A circle with a dot at its center is the universal sign for the sun, source of all warmth, light, and power. This hieroglyph also stands for the world egg, from whose fertile center all creation arose and continues to arise. It is related to paradise, that blissful state of unconscious nature which humanity experienced before falling into the reality of consciousness. It is the primeval womb where we all lived once upon a time, outside space and time. The nostalgia we feel for our childhood reflects this great longing to be contained once more in the perfect circle, the original state of wholeness, where the union of opposites is attained. In Jungian psychology, the dot is the ego, the center of consciousness, and the circle is the self, the center of the entire psyche, which embraces both consciousness and the unconscious. Jung writes, "It is not I who create myself, rather I happen to myself." The imagery of the Fool, who lives on today in our playing cards disguised as the Joker, has gone through many symbolic transformations, alternating between beggar, madman, and fool. The Visconti Sforza tarot, dating from the 15th century, are believed to be the oldest surviving cards, though no complete deck has survived. Here, the Fool is depicted as a beggar or vagabond wearing ragged clothes and stockings without shoes. He carries a stick and has feathers in his hair, which may relate to the notion of the wild man. In the Sola Busca tarot, created by an unknown artist in the late 15th century, the Fool has a feathered headdress and plays a bagpipe, while in the German Hofamterspiel of the same era, the Fool, Narr, also plays a bagpipe but is barefooted, wearing a robe and bells on his hood, reminiscent of the court jester. In the Montaigne Tarocchi from the same century, the Fool is portrayed as a semi-naked old man leaning on a staff, with the word misero, beggar, inscribed. In this card we see an animal trying to grab his attention. The Fool is in such close contact with his instinctual side that he does not need to look where he is going in the literal sense. His animal nature guides his steps. In an old French tarot card, the Fool appears blindfolded, further emphasizing his ability to act by insight rather than eyesight, using intuitive wisdom instead of conventional logic. In an old Swiss card, the Fool has a full jester outfit and holds a wand. In subsequent card decks, such as the Tarot of Marseilles, popular during the 17th and 18th centuries, the Fool wears a jester hat, carries a bundle of belongings on a stick over his back, and is chased by an animal who has torn his pants, or is happily following a butterfly. Finally, we have the popular image of the Fool about to fall off a cliff used in the Rider-Waite Tarot deck published in 1909 by the Rider Company, illustrated by Pamela Colman Smith under the guidance of British poet and mystic Arthur Edward Waite, both of whom were members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Psychologically, the archetype of the Fool is the precursor to transformation, representing a new beginning. Nothing would start without the Fool. Inventors and geniuses, it has been said, have almost always been looked on as no better than fools at the beginning of their career, and very frequently at the end of it also. Shoshin is a Zen Buddhist concept meaning beginner's mind, opposed to closed-mindedness and the attitude of thinking oneself an expert. In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, in the expert's there are few. Open-mindedness can lead to the cultivation of silence, which provides the necessary space for the mysterious experience of the numinous. If you cannot listen to what someone next to you is saying, you are not going to hear the voice of silence. The potential of our five senses is vast, but they are limited by our lack of refinement. Jung writes, "The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom." To embark on a journey of self-discovery is traditionally considered foolish. We are supposed to follow a linear path, education, work, marriage, and so on. When a person deviates from this path, he is seen as a fool whose adventures will amount to nothing but poverty and misery. The first step is usually the hardest and the most important. As the Chinese proverb goes, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." The fool thinks of all the wonderful adventures that lie ahead and is less worried about making mistakes. He thinks on his feet, is energetic, and urges us to live life to the fullest, while the person who thinks too much is overcautious and remains stagnant. It is the fear of uncertainty that scares many of us to the point of paralysis. To avoid the pain of anticipation, we'd rather experience failure now and sacrifice the possibility of success. This state of rumination and overthinking creates anxiety, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Failure, however, can open new doors that one never imagined or expected to be open. What we think of abstractly as absolute failure may, in fact, lead to unimaginable success. As the alchemists say, in filth it will be found. What you need most is to be found where you least wish to look. The fool usually has no idea what he is getting into by starting a new journey, and does not see all the trials he has to overcome, trials that might have prevented him from going at all if he had been fully aware. The fool lives in the moment and sees reality as it is. He is not afraid of change or of exploring unknown and new territory, despite being warned of its dangers. No matter how many times he stumbles, the fool keeps going. No great person has ever gone through life without committing mistakes. In the end, it is the journey that matters, not the destination. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started, and know the place for the first time. While the fool has many positive aspects, he can also be so stubborn that he does not take a moment to step back and reflect, to look where he is headed, and so he falls off a cliff. The fool stands on the edge. Sometimes our inner intuitive voice of protection becomes judgmental and self-perpetuating. It turns into the voice that tells you, "Be careful, you will make a fool of yourself." That is a dumb question. Everyone is going to laugh at you and judge you. You sound ridiculous. This is the voice of conformity and the dark side of the fool. It is the voice that causes you to dumb down and play it safe, to be content with superficial pleasures and safety, and to strive for other people's acceptance at the expense of your true desires. This happens when we are unconscious of the fool within us, which leads to jealousy, resentment, shame, and other neuroses. In his relationship to the journey towards individuation, the fool demonstrates both the initiative and the resistance inherent in his nature. He is closely tied to the archetype of eternal youth, which we all possess after growing up from childhood. This archetype can bring the energy, beauty, and creativity of childhood into adult life, or it can thwart self-realization and doom us to unrealistic adolescent fantasies, making us experience life as a prison. The fool is closely related to the child archetype. Children have less of a persona and follow their instinct rather than what others tell them to do, the Freudian superego. The child has half entered the rational world and the madman has half escaped from it, for these two are, to some extent, released from the remorseless pressure of daily events, the ceaseless impact of the external senses, which burden the rest of humankind. The fool is light-hearted and optimistic and does not take things too seriously. Friedrich Nietzsche writes, "Man's maturity, to have regained the seriousness that he had as a child at play." Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz equates the fool with the inferior function, Jung's term for the most undeveloped aspect of the psyche, related to the four basic psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. For example, the inferior function of a predominantly thinking type would be feeling. However, the fool concerns something more than just the inferior function, for the fool is an archetypal religious figure. Von Franz writes, he implies a part of the human personality or even of humanity, which remained behind and therefore still has the original wholeness of nature. He symbolizes a specific, mainly religious, function. But in mythology, as soon as the fool appears as the fourth in a group of four people, we have a certain right to assume that he mirrors the general behavior of an inferior function. The fool hero represents the despised part of the personality, the ridiculous and unadapted part. But he is also the bridge to the unconscious, and therefore holds the secret key to the unconscious totality of an individual. The fool connects two worlds: the everyday world where we live most of the time and the world of imagination. He is the gate to the great treasure, bringing a renewal of life. It is the inferior function that leads to the healing of our Fisher King wound. The holy fool is one who is willing to risk ridicule, scorn, and rejection to follow the path of truth and love, no matter what the naysayers have to say. He possesses an integrity displayed in the courage to be himself in all circumstances, not needing to be defined by others' responses, nor becoming conformist out of fear. He is free of judging others by conventional values and is fully present to another human being. The holy fool is unstoppable and is thus one of the most threatening figures to the authorities and powers that control and rule the world. Each person is worthy of God's love, and therefore each person has the potential to grow into the full life of the Spirit. To be a fool for Christ's sake derives from the writings of St. Paul, who claims that God has made foolish the wisdom of this world. He says of unbelievers that, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Foolishness for Christ consists in a rejection of worldly possessions in favor of a religious and ascetic life, even if it results in humiliation and mockery from the crowd. The fool is the precursor to the Savior. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. If this journey into the human psyche resonated with you, make sure to subscribe and stay for more explorations like this. Your presence helps these ideas reach those who might need them.